The heat in the Mojave that morning didn't rise so much as settle, a dry, heavy pressure that pushed down into the shoulders and behind the eyes. Dust hung in the air like a layer of old ash, kicked up by the slow, deliberate steps of a lone Mustang. The rider sat tall, but worn, boots scuffed, duster faded, hat stained with sweat from too many summers out here. Calder Rain didn't ride for show. He rode because it was the only thing left that made sense. He was a former Union cavalry scout, long separated from any uniform or command. When the war ended, Calder had returned to the frontier town of Arroyo Ridge with plans. A parcel of land he'd inherited, a fiancée he intended to marry, and the rough sketch of a quiet life he thought he might actually deserve. But within days of arriving, he learned Delaney Wren, the girl he'd left behind with a kiss and a promise, was gone. No note, no trail, just a closed-up house and whispers from neighbors that she'd left with no explanation. Calder didn't ask many questions after that. He buried it the same way he'd buried every field comrade who bled out in the mud beside him, with a deep, quiet bitterness. For the next 3 years, he drifted, working fence lines, chasing cattle, drinking cheap whiskey when the memories got too loud. Now, at 37, he was still out here, a man surviving, not living. His reason for being in this corner of the desert was straightforward. He lost 3 head of cattle 2 days ago. Tracks led out past the northern ridge. He'd packed light, brought Bishop, a brindle mutt that followed him everywhere since he pulled the dog out of a barbed wire fence 3 winters back, and set out on horseback with a rifle, a canteen, and a quiet resolve. That was the kind of life Calder had shaped for himself. Simple, practical, detached. But this morning, something was off. Bishop had gone stiff beside the trail, ears pricked, nose high. The dog gave one bark, short, sharp, then darted off toward the scrub. Calder didn't rush. He gripped the reins, brought the Mustang around, and followed with a cautious eye. Out here, trouble didn't always announce itself. He found the dog crouched near a gnarled patch of mesquite brush at the base of a shallow ravine. Bishop whined, pawing at the sand like he was digging something out. Calder slid off the saddle, boots sinking half an inch into the dust, and moved in slow. One hand on his holstered revolver, the other ready to pull the dog back. Then he saw it, a figure, human, partially covered in wind-blown sand, the body motionless, face turned just enough to reveal cracked lips, torn fabric, skin the color of old parchment. At first, he thought it was a corpse, and maybe it had been for hours. But when he dropped to a knee, leaned in, and placed his fingers at the woman's neck, he felt it. A pulse. Weak but there. His first reaction was clinical. Years in the war taught him to move fast when a life hung by a thread. He scanned her for wounds. No blood. Just heat damage, dehydration, and a body on the edge of collapse. He pulled a flask from his saddlebag, tipped a few drops into her mouth. Her throat twitched, tried to swallow. She was still in there. Then came the moment of recognition. It started with the shape of her jaw, then the curve of her cheek. And even through the dirt and the split in her lower lip, he knew. His body stiffened. His hands stopped moving. It was her. Delaney? The name left his mouth like a reflex. He blinked hard, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with the facts he'd accepted years ago. The woman he thought had left him behind. The woman whose absence shaped everything he became. She was here, nearly dead, lying in the desert, no explanation, no sense. Calder stepped back, chest tight. His thoughts tumbled in rapid flashes: betrayal, confusion, grief, disbelief, then something else, fear. Not for himself, for her. If she was real and not some heat-born illusion, then something had happened. Something bad, and it wasn't over yet. He moved quickly then, like he was back on a battlefield, pulled her gently from the sand, one arm under her back, the other beneath her knees. She didn't stir. Her body was limp, light as kindling. Bishop barked once, then fell in line as Calder carried her up the ridge, his boots dragging in the loose gravel. He walked, not rode. The trail was too rough for her condition. Every jolt might cost her something. And more than that, he needed time to think, needed to keep moving to outrun the panic building in his chest. Who had done this to her? How had she survived out here alone? Why now? More importantly, what did he do now? When he reached the shelter of his camp, a crude canvas lean-to wedged against a rocky bluff, he set her down with care, unrolled his bedroll, shaded her with his coat, and poured more water past her lips. She swallowed, barely. Her breath came shallow and raspy. He sat beside her. The sun slid higher. Shadows shrank. The dog laid its head across her ankle like it understood something profound. Calder didn't speak, didn't move. For the first time in years, Calder Rain didn't know what came next. But one thing was clear. This woman wasn't gone. And whatever she'd been through, it wasn't over. He would not let her die here. Not again. The hours stretched without shape or sound. The heat didn't break until well into the afternoon, and even then, the air stayed heavy, too dry for comfort and too still for peace. Calder remained seated next to her the entire time, one knee drawn up, elbows resting on it, eyes switching between the woman on the bedroll and the ridge behind them. His rifle leaned against the bluff nearby. He hadn't touched it yet. If someone had left her for dead out there, they could still be watching. He didn't like not knowing, didn't like guessing. But right now, questions were all he had. Delaney's breathing stayed shallow but steady. He could see the rise and fall of her ribs beneath the tattered fabric of her dress. The skin on her arms was red and cracked. Her face was blistered from the sun. There were scratches down her legs, half-healed bruises under the layer of desert grime. Some looked old, some looked fresh. What she'd endured, it wasn't just the walk through the desert. Calder wet the cloth again, dragging the edge of the canteen across her brow, gently dabbing the moisture into her skin. She flinched slightly at the contact, her eyes twitching behind closed lids. "You're not dying out here," he muttered. "Not now. Not like this." He didn't know if she heard him. He didn't know if he believed it. By nightfall, the worst of the heat had passed. He stoked a small fire away from the bedroll, keeping the flame low. Coyotes howled in the distance. He ladled water into a dented tin cup, let it sit until it cooled, then tried again to get her to drink. She swallowed this time. Only a little, but it was something. A reaction. A choice. Her lips moved just barely. He leaned in. "What?" he asked, voice low. A whisper. Broken. A single syllable. Cold. Calder exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. He pulled the coat up over her chest, tucking it gently beneath her chin, and added another log to the fire. For a moment, he looked at her face again. The same shape, the same mouth, though aged now, worn from time and hardship. But still her. No question. And that realization hit him again, just like when he first saw her lying in the dirt. That strange mix of shock, anger, guilt, and something worse. Hope. He didn't know what had brought her here. He didn't know what she'd been through or how far she had come to land at his feet. But none of it made sense. She'd promised to wait. She was gone when he came back. Everyone told him she ran off. Some said she'd eloped with a traveling merchant. Others claimed she'd been seen boarding a stagecoach headed west, never looking back. One old drunk at the saloon had muttered something about a gang coming through town and strange things happening at night. But Calder had dismissed it all. He'd been too angry, too hurt to listen. He'd wanted to believe she made the choice. It was easier than believing she'd been taken. He stirred the fire with a branch and watched the embers shift. Bishop sat just beyond the firelight, eyes trained on the shadows. The dog hadn't barked again since the discovery, just stayed close, alert, tail low. Animals knew things men didn't. Calder stood up slowly and walked a few paces away, staring out across the dark ridge. He scanned the horizon. Nothing moved, but that didn't mean it was safe. He unbuckled his belt, checked the revolver, and reloaded 2 chambers, just in case. If someone had left her in that ravine, someone dangerous, they might come back. Maybe they thought she wouldn't live long enough to crawl away. Maybe they didn't care. Or maybe this was a message, and Calder just happened to receive it. He didn't like the feeling building in his gut. He returned to her side and crouched again. Her chest moved a little more now. The color had returned slightly to her lips. She looked human again, not just like a ghost buried in sand. "Delaney," he said quietly, not expecting an answer. Her eyelids flickered. Then, faintly, her lips parted. Dear. He froze. It wasn't just breath anymore. It wasn't a dream state. She knew who he was. He leaned in closer. I'm here, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. You're all right. I've got you. Her eyes opened, not fully, just a thin slit, enough to see. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then tears welled up and rolled sideways in her hairline. I didn't leave. Her voice cracked. He saw the way her throat tensed, like every word cost her effort. You need a rest, he said. They took me. She coughed. He lifted the cup, helped her sip again. When she lay back, she turned her head away from him and said no more. He didn't press. Not tonight. But the weight of her words hit him with brutal force. They took me. Not ran. Not chose. Not forgot. Taken. And suddenly, all those stories he refused to listen to, all those broken rumors and slurred half-truths, came flooding back with new weight. He had buried the pain by telling himself she never loved him, that she'd change her mind, that he had been foolish to believe in anything as soft as promises in a town full of hard people. But now the truth was rising. He could feel it in the back of his throat like bile. Calder looked at her again. She had fallen back asleep, this time deeper, breathing more regularly. He moved his saddle closer, leaned against it, and sat down hard in the dirt. He wouldn't sleep that night, because if someone had taken her, someone had to pay. And if she had survived all this time just to collapse into his arms again, he wasn't going to let her go. Not until he knew the whole story. And not until he made sure nothing like that ever happened to her again. Not on his land. Not in his presence. Not ever again. Morning came slow and quiet. The first light of dawn crept over the ridge, stretching long shadows across the dirt. The fire had burned low, and Calder sat exactly where he had the night before, his back against the saddle, arms crossed, boots half buried in sand. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but he hadn't moved. Not once. Every time Delaney made a noise, a breath that caught, a slight twitch of her leg, he listened, watched, waited. Now she stirred again. Calder leaned forward, his muscles stiff. He reached for the canteen, unscrewed the lid, and knelt beside her just as her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the morning glare. She looked directly at him, fully awake this time. There was no confusion, no fading in and out, just quiet awareness. You made it through the night, he said. Her voice rasped, barely there. Water. He helped her sit up with care, one arm supporting her back. She winced but didn't protest. Her body was weak, but her spirit was still buried somewhere inside. He could see it in her eyes. She drank slowly. The first few sips stayed down. She took a breath, then drank more. Only after he set the canteen aside did she speak again. You found me. Calder gave a slow nod. Or Bishop did. He led me to you. Her gaze shifted to the dog, lying nearby, tail thumping once in response. She smiled faintly. You always kept that dog fed better than yourself, she said. He didn't answer. He wasn't ready for small talk. Not yet. How long, she asked. Couple days since I found you. She furrowed her brow. No, how long since? I was gone. Calder looked away for a second, then met her eyes again. 3 years. She blinked. Her lips parted like she might cry, but no tears came. Just silence. I thought, she whispered. I thought you'd think I left. I did. Her throat moved as she swallowed hard. You didn't look for me? I didn't know where to start, he said quietly. There was nothing to follow. No letter. No sign. Just a closed door and a town full of people who didn't know what happened. Delaney shut her eyes, pulled the coat tighter around her. They came in the night. The first week after you left. A gang, I don't know how many. They waited until dark. Broke into the house. Her voice wavered. They took me. One of them, he knew my name. I don't know how. Said you weren't coming back. Calder felt his jaw clench. His hand tightened around the edge of the bedroll. She went on. I screamed. Fought. Bit one of them. They laughed. Said no one would care if I disappeared. Said girls like me don't get found. She paused. Her breathing grew shallow. She looked away. Calder didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't just pain. It was something worse. Shame. And he hated that for her. Where they take you? He asked. Her eyes found his again. Everywhere. I don't remember all of it. I tried to escape twice. Got caught. beaten, sold off to another man, somewhere east of Yuma. I waited, watched, learned how to listen when no one knew I was listening. 2 weeks ago, I ran for good. Calder exhaled slowly. You crossed the desert alone? She nodded. With no map, no horse. Just memories, she said. I followed the stars. I thought maybe you were still out here. He stood up, walked a few feet away. His hands trembled, but he kept his back to her. He couldn't let her see what it did to him. Not yet. Not until he could get his thoughts under control. He stared out at the horizon, where the sun now painted the rocks orange. He wanted to kill someone. No, not someone. All of them. Every man who had laid a hand on her. Every bastard who let it happen. But anger wouldn't change what had been done. He turned back to her. You're safe now, he said. I'll make sure of it. Delaney looked like she wanted to believe him, but couldn't say it aloud. She touched her temple gently, then lowered her hand. I thought I was going to die out there, she said. I lay down and told myself, this is it. Then Bishop came, and you were there, just like before. That stirred something in Calder. Not just emotion, something older, buried, raw. He crouched back down, elbows on his knees, and looked her square in the face. I'm not letting them take anything else from you, he said. Not your life, not your name, not your strength. I don't care how long it takes. We're going to fix this. She stared at him, then finally nodded. After a moment, she said, Are we far from town? Far enough. Do they know I'm alive? No one knows, he said, and I am to keep it that way until you're ready. She leaned back slowly, her expression calmer now, though exhaustion still weighed on her. Calder reached for the pot and started heating beans over the fire. Delaney watched quietly. After a few minutes, she asked, Do you still have a ring? He stopped moving. Yeah, he said. I never pawned it. I thought about it, she said softly. That ring. It was all I had in my head when things got bad. That and your name. He didn't reply. He couldn't. He just focused on the pot until it started to boil. Because no one had ever spoken to him like that before. And no one ever would again. She was alive. And that meant there was still a chance to make it right. The wind shifted later that day, bringing with it cooler air from the western hills and the faint smell of mesquite. Calder took it as a sign, time to move. The ridge they were camped on was too exposed, and now that Delaney was conscious, every passing hour brought more questions. What if someone had followed her trail? What if the men who'd taken her realized she wasn't dead? What if they came looking? He didn't trust the stillness of the desert anymore. By late afternoon, he packed up camp. He didn't say much, just worked in silence, moving with the same precision he used back in the cavalry. Deliberate, economical, efficient. He wrapped Delaney in a wool blanket and secured her carefully across the Mustang's back, building a sling with saddle straps and an old tarp so she could lie flat without slipping. She was too weak to ride on her own, but she didn't complain. She just watched him the whole time, like she was still trying to make sense of the man in front of her. He caught her staring once and paused. What is it? He asked. You haven't changed much. He didn't answer. They rode slowly, heading east toward a stretch of high canyon where Calder knew a stream ran year-round. It was a place he used sometimes when he needed to disappear, a thin crack in the desert wall with enough cover and clean water to wait out trouble. They arrived by dusk. The sun was low and red behind them. Calder set up a second camp in the shadow of the canyon, this one tighter, more secure. He laid Delaney near the water's edge, close enough to catch the coolness, but far from the rocks that might harbor snakes. The dog took his post a few feet away, nose twitching, ears alert. That night, Calder cooked real food, beans mixed with smoked meat, soft enough for her to eat. She tried a few spoonfuls and managed to keep them down. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign she was starting to recover. They sat near the fire, both quiet, both watching the flames. A few stars appeared overhead. Then Delaney asked something he hadn't expected. Why didn't you marry someone else? He looked over at her. She wasn't smiling, wasn't testing him. She truly wanted to know. I didn't want anyone else, he said. You didn't even try? No. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I dreamed you did. I dreamed you were happy without me. I wasn't. She nodded slowly, as if the answer settled something inside her. After a pause, she asked, Do people in town still talk about me? Not really. After a while, they stopped bringing you up at all. Too uncomfortable, I guess. Easier for them to forget than admit they didn't do a damn thing. Did anyone look for me? He shook his head. They thought you left. Some thought you were embarrassed or ashamed. Some thought you'd found something better in another town. She swallowed hard. So they blamed me. Calder didn't reply. She took a breath, and her voice dropped lower. Back then, after they took me, the first time I escaped, I tried to find help. A ranch outside a dry creek. The man said he'd help. Gave me food. Said he'd get the sheriff. But he sent me right back to them. Got paid for it. Calder clenched his jaw. What was his name? I don't know. He had a daughter. Said she'd been taken once too, years ago. Maybe he thought turning me in would stop it from happening again. Or maybe he was just scared. That's not an excuse, Calder said flatly. No, she agreed. It's not. They sat in silence again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that held weight, truth laid bare, nothing left to decorate it. Later, after she had fallen asleep, Calder stayed up, listening to the canyon. He scanned the brush beyond the firelight and thought through the last 3 days. There were questions that still hadn't been answered, things she hadn't spoken about yet. What happened in the time between Yuma and the desert? How had she evaded capture for 2 weeks with no horse, no water, and no weapon? And perhaps the most difficult, why now? Why had she come back now, after all this time? He didn't ask her yet because she wasn't ready. He could see it in the way her hands still shook when she thought he wasn't looking. He could hear it in her voice when it trailed off mid-sentence. She was carrying more than she was letting on, and she needed to trust the ground again before she could unload any of it. The next morning, she insisted on standing. Calder tried to stop her, but she gripped his arm and sat up on her own, then pulled herself to her feet, swaying slightly. She didn't make it more than 2 steps before she collapsed again, but he caught her. You're not ready, he said. I have to be, she replied, breathless. They're not done. They'll come. Then we'll be ready too. She looked at him sharply. You don't know who they are. Then tell me. I don't know their names, she said, but I remember the one who hurt me the most. He had a scar under his left eye. Spoke with a southern accent. Call me darlin' like it meant something. Calder's expression darkened. You see him again, you tell me. That's all I need. She nodded. For the rest of the day, he helped her practice walking short distances. He let her lean on him, didn't rush her, didn't ask too much. Just walked with her. Listened. Waited. By nightfall, she managed to gather sticks for the fire. When he thanked her, she looked surprised. No one's thanked me in a long time. Well, get used to it. The words weren't sweet, but the way he said them, quiet, steady, unflinching, carried more weight than any promise. Delaney looked at him, studying his face, then whispered, I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again. You are now. And this time, she believed it. Not because the pain was gone, but because he stayed. The days that followed fell into a slow rhythm, simple but fragile, like something that could fall apart if either of them moved too fast. Calder made a habit of waking early, long before the sun touched the rim of the canyon. He checked the perimeter first, always. Tracks, disturbed brush, scat from coyotes, he noted it all. He wasn't expecting trouble, but after what Delaney had been through, he wasn't taking chances either. She never said it, but he could tell she expected the peace to end at any moment. Delaney was walking better now. Not far, and not without help, but enough to feel some control again. Calder built a crude set of crutches from pine wood and twine, and she practiced with them, stubborn and silent. She didn't ask for assistance. He gave it anyway without asking. On the 3rd morning, she caught him saddling the Mustang. You leaving? Just down to the basin. There's a creek feeds into a spring. Might be trout. You're going alone? He looked over. Wouldn't leave you if I didn't think you'd be safe. She didn't respond, but her jaw clenched slightly. He walked over, handed her his revolver. Loaded. 4 rounds. You don't need to be a good shot. Just aim center. She took it with both hands and nodded. When Calder returned a few hours later with 2 fish tied to a line, he found the fire already lit and Delaney sitting upright, carving a piece of driftwood with his pocket knife. The pistol was tucked beside her on a blanket. She didn't smile, but something in her face had changed. Less guarded. Less waiting for something to go wrong. That evening, as they ate by firelight, she broke the silence first. You didn't ask what I planned to do next. I figured you didn't know yet. I don't. You don't have to decide now. I know, she said, but I've thought about it. He looked over at her. She held her tin plate steady. There's a part of me that wants to go back. Tell the sheriff. Say every name I heard, every face I can remember. Stand in a room and say what they did to me. Calder nodded slowly. And the other part wants to disappear. Build something somewhere quiet and never speak of any of it again. Neither one of those is wrong, he said. She didn't answer, just kept eating. Later, as the fire burned down to embers, she spoke again. You never said what you did after I vanished. Calder stared at the coals. I left town, rode east, took work where I could get it. Most of it didn't pay. Some of it did. Spent a few months riding security for a stage line. Couple cattle runs. Got shot in the shoulder in New Mexico, still stiff when it rains. She gave him a look. You really didn't look for me? He didn't answer right away. I did, in the beginning, he said finally. Ask questions. Got told a lot of half-truths and shrugs. Every trail I followed ended in sand. After that, I stopped asking. Delaney looked away. I used to wonder what I'd say to you if I ever saw you again. You still wonder? Not as much. Talking now helps. Being here. They sat a while longer. Calder reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it and held something in his hand, small, silver, dull with age. The ring, she whispered. I carried it all this time, he said. Never really knew why. Habit, maybe. She looked at it, but didn't reach for it. I'm not the same person, Calder. I wouldn't expect you to be. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. You don't have to know, he said. Not yet. You just have to heal. What if I never feel whole again? He paused. Then we build something new from what's left. She blinked, eyes shining now, but she didn't let the tears fall. She leaned forward, rested her hand on his. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just let stay there. The canyon held the quiet around them. And for the first time since finding her, Calder felt like something was shifting, not fixed, not certain, but moving in the right direction. That night, as they lay in separate bedrolls, she asked one last thing. Do you think they'll come looking for me? If they do, he said, they'll wish they hadn't. And in the stillness that followed, she finally slept without twitching. By the end of the week, Delaney could walk without the crutches, slow, careful steps across the flat stretch near the canyon's edge, but it was progress. She still wore the same patch dress Calder had found her in, though he'd stitched it as best he could, and she'd washed it twice at the creek. It still didn't feel like hers. Nothing did yet. But moving, breathing, choosing to stand, those were things she had control over again. Calder watched her from a distance most mornings. He gave her space, always within reach, but never crowding. That was something else she had to learn again. What it meant to feel safe in someone's presence without waiting for the moment it turned. He noticed how she flinched less now, how she started looking people, him, in the eye longer, how her silence felt different, not heavy like before, but steady, thoughtful. They spoke more often now, and what they talked about began to shift, not just survival, but life. Tell me about your land, she asked one evening, sitting on a boulder, feet dipped in the cold stream. The one you inherited. 20 acres outside Arroyo Ridge, Calder said. Bit rocky, needed work, but there's a well. Some fenced pasture. Why didn't you live there? Didn't feel right without you, he answered. I thought about selling it. Why didn't you? He hesitated. Guess I wasn't ready to let go. Delaney looked down at the water, moving around her toes. Maybe that's where I go. If I stay, you could. Would you? If you wanted me to. She turned toward him. I never stopped wanting you to. They didn't touch, didn't move. But something between them shifted again, a wall lowering, a door cracking open. That night, Calder sharpened his knife under the lantern light and brought up something that had been on his mind for days. You never said how you escaped, he said. Not really. Delaney was quiet a moment, then sat down on the opposite side of the fire, knees drawn up. They left me with a man in a mining camp outside Coyote Ridge. I pretended to be sick. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't speak. He thought I was dying. Stopped locking the door. I waited until he passed out drunk. Took his boots and ran. Just like that. I had no plan. Just knew I had to go. I walked nights. Hid during the day. Ate cactus. Stole water off ranch porches when I could. I told myself if I could just reach the basin, I might find someone who didn't want to hurt me. Calder nodded slowly. And you found me. I didn't expect to. Honestly, I thought I'd die in the sand. I just didn't want to die alone. She said it plainly. No tears. No tremble. Just the flat, honest truth of a woman who had already lived through worse than death. He didn't try to comfort her. Didn't offer empty words. He simply said, "You're not alone anymore." She nodded. The next day, they rode into the high trees above the canyon. Calder wanted to scout the ridgeline for signs of movement. Old camps, footprints, anything that might suggest someone had passed through recently. Delaney insisted on going with him, even though the ride would be slow and hard on her legs. He didn't argue. The climb took hours. By mid-afternoon, they reached a narrow overlook that gave them a full view of the desert beyond, the same direction she'd crawled from. Delaney dismounted, her hands tight on the saddle horn, and walked to the edge. She stood silent for a long time. "This is where I thought I'd fall," she said quietly. "That ridge. I came over it just before I passed out." Calder looked down at the trail. The sand there had been disturbed recently. Tracks. Several. Horses, not wagons. 3, maybe 4. Days old, but still clear. "Someone's been through here," he said, crouching to examine the marks. Delaney tensed. "Could it be them? Could be anyone," Calder said. But he didn't believe that. He'd seen enough trail signs to know when riders were moving with a purpose. They weren't searching, he added. They were heading north. Fast, like they just left something behind. She looked at him. "Then we don't have time, do we?" "We have time," he said. "We just don't have the luxury of standing still." They rode back with urgency, but not panic. Calder didn't want to spook her, but something in his chest told him the peace they'd found in the canyon was nearing its end. That night, while she slept, Calder packed supplies quietly. He laid out his old saddle rifle, checked its sight, oiled the chamber. He hadn't fired it in months, but something told him it was going to be necessary again soon. He glanced over at her as she shifted in her sleep, murmuring his name. Whatever came next, whatever waited on the trail or back in Arroyo Ridge, he knew one thing for certain. He was ready for it, and he wasn't going to lose her a second time. They left the canyon at first light. Calder didn't ask again if Delaney was ready. He'd seen in her eyes that steady, measured resolve she now wore like armor. She still moved slow, still winced when her muscles pulled wrong, but she didn't complain. She climbed into the saddle with both hands firm and her jaw set. They headed northeast toward Arroyo Ridge. The ride was quiet for hours, broken only by the occasional distant hawk call or the sound of Bishop's paws brushing through the brush ahead. Calder led the way, scanning the horizon with a seasoned eye. Delaney rode a few paces behind, occasionally adjusting the bandana around her neck, the one Calder had given her to block the sun. He watched her posture. She was tired. She wouldn't admit it, but it was clear in the way her shoulders slumped when she thought he wasn't looking. Midday came and went. They passed through scrubland, crossed a shallow creek where they let the horses drink, then pushed forward until the land began to rise again. By dusk, they reached a small outcrop that overlooked the valley below, and for the first time in years, Delaney saw the faint outline of Arroyo Ridge in the distance. She sat still in the saddle, staring down at it. "Looks the same," she said finally. "Some things haven't changed," Calder replied. "Do they still talk about me there?" "Most folks don't talk much about anything unless it benefits them." She gave a dry laugh. "So no." They made camp just off the trail, under the cover of juniper trees. Calder built the fire low, half shielded by a rock wall. He kept his rifle close. Delaney helped gather firewood for the first time, limping but steady. It was a quiet partnership now. No need to explain who did what. They simply did what needed doing. That night, she sat across from him, staring at the flames, hands wrapped around a tin of coffee. "I've been thinking," she said. Calder didn't interrupt. "I want to go to the sheriff when we get back. I want to file a report. Put down everything I remember. Every name. Every place. Even if it doesn't do anything." "It might," Calder said. "Or it might start something. Then let it start." She sipped the coffee. Her voice was calmer now, like the fear had settled somewhere manageable. "But I need something from you." He met her eyes. "When I go in there," she continued, "when I say everything I've buried for 3 years, I need you beside me. Not just in the room, I need you with me. You have me, he said. She nodded once, looking relieved. Not surprised. Just steady, like she expected it now. They both looked into the fire. Calder took a long breath. There's something I haven't told you, he said. Something I found last week. Delaney turned her gaze to him. I went to an old relay station, picked up supplies. The owner, Weller, he used to know everyone passing through. He said a man came by looking for you. Scar under his eye. Rode a buckskin horse. Her breath caught. That's him. That's the one who kept me after Yuma. Calder nodded. Weller said he asked around for a woman matching your description. Said he lost her on the trail. Thought she might have been taken in by someone. Did he say where he went? North, toward Carson's Junction. But the way he asked, it didn't sound like he was giving up. Delaney's face paled. He won't stop. He will, Calder said, voice low. If he comes near you again, he'll stop breathing. She didn't argue. Later, as they prepared to sleep, she looked across at him and asked, Why me? What do you mean? Why did you stay alone all these years? Why didn't you move on, build a life, forget about me? He sat down slowly on his bedroll. The fire cracked between them. I tried, he said. I even got close once. Thought I could bury it. Thought I could live like the past never happened. But every time I looked at a woman, I saw your face. Every time I rode past the church, I remembered your hand in mine. It never left me. I just stopped letting it show. Delaney's voice was barely above a whisper. You never stopped loving me. I never figured out how. She wiped a tear with the back of her hand and pulled the blanket up to her chin. I don't know if I'm capable of being the same person again. You don't have to be, he said. You just have to be you. She looked over at him, eyes shining. Then I think I want to stay. If you'll have me. Calder didn't smile. He just nodded once. Tomorrow, he said, we ride into town together. And after that, he said, we see what's left and we make it ours. The firelight flickered as the wind picked up slightly. Bishop circled once and settled between them, his head resting near the edge of Delaney's blanket. And for the first time since she'd fallen into the sand, neither of them was waiting for the next bad thing to come. They were riding toward it, together. They rode into Arroyo Ridge just past noon the following day, covered in trail dust and dried wind, looking like any other pair of worn travelers from a basin. The town hadn't changed much. A few new signs, a new coat of paint on the sheriff's office, the same crooked hitching posts, the same wood plank sidewalk running uneven along the main strip. People looked up as they passed, storekeepers, ranch hands, old-timers who'd been planted on that same porch bench for years. Some stared longer than others. A few narrowed their eyes at Delaney. Calder saw it all, and he ignored it. He led the horses around to the back alley behind the boarding house, tied them off, and helped Delaney down. She was stiff, but she stood tall. She scanned the buildings, the saloon, the mercantile, the chapel. It all looked smaller than it used to, but also sharper, as if time had burned the edges down to what mattered most. They entered the sheriff's office together. The room was quiet. The sheriff, Emery Bass, a gray-bearded man with a revolver on his hip and a ledger always open on his desk, looked up as the door creaked. Rain, he said with a nod. Been a while. Sheriff, Calder replied. We need a word. Bass's gaze slid to Delaney. He blinked, then stood. Well, I'll be damned. Delaney didn't flinch. No, I'm not. She stepped forward. I'm here to report a crime. Actually, several. I was taken from this town 3 years ago, kidnapped, held against my will, passed between men like property. And I want on record. Bass looked stunned, then slowly motioned toward a chair. They sat for an hour. Delaney spoke clearly, calmly. She gave every detail she could recall. The gang that took her, their route through Yuma, the man with the scar under his eye, the rancher near Dry Creek who turned her in. Names, towns, faces. Bass took notes, asked questions. She answered all of them. Calder didn't speak unless asked. He sat next to her, hands folded, watching the door, watching her posture. When she hesitated, only twice, he gave her space but stayed close enough she could feel him there. And she did. When it was over, Bass closed the ledger and leaned back in his chair. Delaney, we heard things back then. Stories. But there was nothing to go on. No weaknesses. Nothing solid. If what you say is true, it is, Calder said flat. I believe you, Bass said, holding up a hand. But some of those men are long gone. And the ones still breathing, they'll know someone's talking. You're not just making noise. You're kicking a hornet's nest. I know, Delaney said. You got somewhere safe? Calder answered. We're headed to my land south of here. It's isolated, fenced. If they come, I'll see them first. Bass nodded once. You ever need a deputy's badge, Rain? I'll draw the paper up myself. They left the office in silence. Outside, the wind had picked up and the streets had grown quieter. Word spread fast in a small town. They passed the church. The door was open, pews inside empty. Calder paused. You want to go in? He asked. Delaney looked up at the steeple. Her face softened. For a moment, they stepped inside. It smelled of pine oil and old wood. Sunlight poured through the dusty windows. She walked slowly toward the altar and sat on the front bench. Calder didn't follow all the way. He waited near the entrance, watching. She didn't pray, just sat. And then, after a while, she looked back at him and said, I think I want to be married here, if we still can. Calder stepped forward. I never took the name off the list. The preacher might still have the date pinned on the wall. She smiled, a real smile this time, the first he'd seen since the desert. Back at the boarding house, they took a room upstairs, small, clean, quiet. Delaney washed and changed into a borrowed dress. Calder stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. Why now? She asked, walking toward him. Why take me back here so soon? Because you deserve to be seen, not pitied, not whispered about. Seen. She rested her forehead against his chest. I don't think I would have survived this alone. You didn't have to. She looked up at him. Do you believe in second chances? I do now. That night, they had dinner at the long bench table near the chapel. Just the two of them, the preacher and Bishop curled under the bench. No gifts, no music, no rings exchanged, just their old promise repeated, and this time kept. The townsfolk watched from porches and windows. Some cried, some stayed silent, but no one objected. No one stood in their way. Afterward, Calder walked with Delaney hand in hand back to the room above the boarding house. She leaned against him as they climbed the stairs. At the top, she paused, looked him in the eye, and said, I don't want to run anymore. You won't have to. And as the lamp inside flickered to life, the past finally stopped chasing them. The next morning came with the sound of hooves. Calder was already awake, sitting at the window with a mug of black coffee, watching the street below. Delaney still slept behind him, curled under the quilt, her breathing even. For the first time since he'd found her in the desert, she'd slept through the night without shifting, without murmuring, without crying out. But the horses outside weren't familiar. For riders, dusty coats, one of them on a buckskin. Calder's grip on the mug tightened. He leaned forward. There, the scar, just under the left eye. The man didn't look up, didn't notice the window. But Calder didn't need more than a glimpse. It was him. He set the mug down slowly, quietly, then crossed the room, grabbed his rifle from the wall, checked the chamber, and sat on the edge of the bed. Delaney, he said gently, resting a hand on her arm. She stirred, blinking into the light. Her eyes locked on his face. What is it? He's here. It didn't take her more than a second to know who he meant. She sat up, her fingers curled into the blanket. Where? Just past the saloon. 4 of them. They don't know we're watching. Her breath caught, but she steadied it quickly. I want to see him. Calder hesitated. You sure? I need to. He nodded once. They dressed quickly. Calder wrapped her hand around the revolver, checked the load, holstered it at her waist. He threw his coat over his shoulder, rifle slung across his back, and led her out the back stair. The streets were busier now. Mid-morning deliveries, wagons rolling past, a few townsfolk stopping to glance at the new arrivals. The 4 riders had dismounted, standing in front of the blacksmith shop, drinking from a canteen, scanning the buildings. Delaney walked just behind Calder, her eyes locked on the man with the scar. She didn't slow. She didn't blink. They crossed the street. Calder nodded to the sheriff's office as they passed. Bass saw them and stepped outside, one hand on his belt, the other resting near his holster. When they reached the blacksmith's post, the man turned and froze. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, drawing out the words. "Look what crawled back." Calder stepped forward. "Don't speak." But Delaney did. "You remember me, don't you?" Her voice was steady, calm, even. The man gave a cold smile. "You cost me a lot, sweetheart. You stole everything from me," she said. "My life, my name, my freedom. You were property. Don't rewrite the story now." That's when Calder punched him. The hit landed square, a sharp, brutal crack that sent the man backward into the wall of the blacksmith's post. The other three reached for weapons. Calder drew first, rifle aimed before their hands were halfway to their belts. Sheriff Bass was already crossing the street. "Hands off the iron," he barked. The three hesitated. "I said hands off." "Now." Delaney stepped forward and pulled the revolver from her hip, raised it without shaking, and aimed it directly at the man on the ground. "You're going to jail," she said, "and you're going to tell them everything. Every man involved, every girl taken, every town you pass through." "Or what?" He spat blood. "You'll shoot me? In front of your sheriff? Your nice little town?" "I won't need to," she said. "You're already finished." Bass stepped in, cuffed the man himself. "You'll be held for kidnapping, trafficking, assault, and whatever else she names." The man laughed once low. "You really think this ends with me? There are more." Calder stepped beside him. "Good. Gives us more to find. By noon, the riders have been locked up. A telegram sent. Witnesses questioned. The sheriff said it might take weeks, but the man would face a federal judge." Delaney sat quietly in the boarding house kitchen, drinking tea. She was pale, but not broken. "You did it," Calder said, standing beside her. "No," she replied. "We did it." She turned to him. "I was afraid it would never end, that I'd always be running." "You're not running anymore." She reached for his hand. "What if there are more? What if they come here? Then we'll be waiting." That evening, as the sun began to dip, they returned to the edge of Calder's land, the old 20 acres he hadn't touched since she vanished. It was still there, rough, untamed. The fence needed mending. The well still stood. Delaney looked over it all, then turned toward him. "We build here." He nodded. "From the ground up. House, barn, everything." She smiled. "Together," she said. It wasn't a question. The work began with silence and shovels. Calder cleared the rocks by hand, one pile at a time. Delaney marked out the corners of the house with twine, her notes sketched in charcoal on the back of old mail paper. The soil was dry and stubborn, but they dug anyway, for foundation posts, for fencing holes, for the idea that something permanent could be rooted in a place where so much had once been lost. The days were long. Dry winds pushed grit into their clothes and under their fingernails. Calder's hands cracked from the labor, the same way they had in the army, and Delaney wore through 2 pairs of borrowed gloves. Still, neither of them stopped. Bishop laid under the shade of a wagon, head resting on his paws, ears flicking every time a hammer cracked or a post thudded into the ground. They were building something now. Not just a home, but a life chosen, not inherited, not stumbled into, made by hand. The town mostly left them alone. A few neighbors brought supplies. Bass came by once to update them. The man with the scar was being transported south for federal trial. He had named others. Warrant papers were already circulating. The sheriff asked if Delaney wanted to testify when the time came. She did, not out of revenge, but to end it, fully, completely, in a courtroom where silence couldn't cover the truth anymore. One morning, while Calder was repairing the old well pulley, Delaney stood watching him, her arms crossed over her chest. "I never asked you what you wanted," she said. He glanced over. "What I wanted? Before all of this. Before me. Before war." He leaned against the wood, wiped sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "Didn't think I had the right to want much," he said. "But I used to picture a little house. Porch with 2 chairs. A stretch of land that was mine. Someone to sit across from in the evening and not say much." She stepped closer. "Sounds familiar." He looked at her. "And you?" "I used to want to get out. Away from small towns. Go east, maybe. Teach children. Live near a river. Someplace green." She paused. "But now I want this. I want to know who I am without fear deciding everything for me." He stepped forward, touched her cheek. "You already are." They didn't talk about love the way young people do, not in long declarations or with lofty words. They They showed it in gestures, in patched clothes, cooked meals, quiet glances. Calder carved her a comb from polished cedar. Delaney found his old journal, added her words to the margins. Their bond wasn't made of vows anymore, but of lived days, small, hard-earned moments that made up something unshakable. The house went up frame by frame. Walls without paint, roof without shingles, but it stood. They moved in before it was done, slept on blankets on the floor, ate bread by lantern light, laughed when the wind came through the window and knocked over the basin. For the first time in years, Delaney's laughter sounded unburdened. One night, while rain tapped gently on the new roof, Calder sat beside her and asked something he'd held at his chest since the desert. "Do you ever wish you hadn't come back?" She looked at him without blinking. "No," she said. "I wish I had come back sooner." She reached for his hand. He pulled her close. They sat in silence, letting the storm pass around them. Weeks turned into months. The trial came and went. She testified. He stood beside her. The gang's names were logged, convictions handed down. No one in Arroyo Ridge questioned her anymore. The whispers stopped. She was no longer a ghost. By autumn, their land had a small garden, a chicken coop, and smoke rising steadily from the chimney. A neighbor's son helped Calder raise a barn. The local schoolteacher asked Delaney if she'd consider volunteering. She said she'd think about it. One afternoon, Calder came home to find her standing barefoot on the porch, looking out at the open land. He walked up beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She turned, and in her hands was a folded piece of cloth, his old cavalry scarf. "I was thinking this might look good on a cradle." He blinked, processing. She smiled. "I'm late." For a moment, he just looked at her, the woman who had walked through hell and back, who still bore the scars but never let them define her. And then he smiled. Not wide, not loud, just a deep, quiet smile that reached all the way to his eyes. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to, because everything, the violence, the loss, the silence, the rebuilding, had led to this. And this time, no one was coming to take it away.